Welcome to People I Know Show, a podcast about interesting people, personal growth, and being wrong. I'm your host, Curt Carstensen. Joining me today on episode 16 of the podcast is Gene Leppala. Prior to recording this conversation, Gene and I hadn't seen each other for more than 2 years. And just a few months ago, Gene had a successful liver transplant. It was fascinating for me to hear Gene's perspective on it, as well as how 20 plus years of heavy drinking ties into this story. We spent about the first hour of this conversation on that topic before discussing the loss and impact of our mutual friend Josh Torgeson and a discussion about my new favorite term, intellectual humility. We finish, as always, with the Being Wrong segment and maybe the most powerful thing Gene learned from his need for a new liver. Please take a few moments to leave a rating or a review of People I Know Show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to today's episode. Search for and follow People I Know Show on Facebook or Instagram to see photos and other content related to the show, including some video of Gene and I recording a portion of this episode. Now, on to my conversation with Gene Leppala. I welcome Gene Leppala to the program. Hello, Gene.
Hello, Curt.
Thank you for joining me today. I've had a few reasons to want to spend some time with you, and I guess we'll get into them one by one. And we were just talking prior to me starting the recording. You are just coming off a few months ago. When was the date of your liver transplant?
The date of my liver transplant was September 15th.
Okay.
So I just got back from the Mayo Clinic for my 4-month post-transplant evaluation.
And I know the answer to this roughly, but how did the 4-month evaluation go?
Myself and the doctors, they couldn't be happier. In some ways, they've never seen test numbers as high as the ones that I'm presenting. It's been an astonishing recovery to myself and the team at the Mayo as well. It's that good. So I'm pretty damn happy about it.
Describe in depth, if you can, the process of recognizing that something's not right with yourself and the length of time and the process it takes to actually knowing that it's a liver issue and then getting a liver and how that all played out for you.
Wow. For me, you basically have to go back even farther than 5 years. I mean, there were times when I knew I wasn't really that healthy, and I knew I was getting less and less healthy. And I lived my whole life kind of thinking, well, this is not going to affect me. A long time I was a bartender, bar manager, etc. And I've seen people that had physical problems with alcohol consumption and things. But I was noticing things, but you're kind of in denial that it's really happening until you get a wake-up call. And a wake-up call is usually something severe that lands you in the hospital. And that's what it was for me. And that was about 5 years ago in February.
And you ended up in the hospital, and then how quickly did they begin testing you to
They
find
immediately started testing things. They take a lot of blood. They do things. And they knew pretty much immediately what it was, and they started taking steps to all sorts of things. I mean, for me, I had a humongous amount of fluid that I had in my abdomen that I was retaining, and they had to drain all that out. They stick a giant needle into your abdomen, and they do an ultrasound looking for large pockets of fluid. They pulled out 7 liters of fluid out of my abdomen, which is obviously pounds and pounds of liquid, 15 roughly. And they do that to make you a lot more comfortable because it stretches your skin. And it happened almost overnight, literally. It's like something broke. And all of a sudden I was normal one day, and the next day my stomach was, out to here, if you can visualize that. So, and then from there, they usually don't pull any punches. They tell you what's up. They can test things very closely. And they put together what's called a MELD score. It's a combination of all your tests, all these different blood levels that they look for to determine liver function. And with that MELD score, they can take their database of humanity that they've recognized or treated over the years and make a assumption or an estimation of what they call a 90-day mortality rate. Literally, where they say, with this score, this is the chance that you will still be alive in 90 days.
What chance did they say to you?
Well, early on, they really didn't say anything directly until I asked. And I didn't ask for a good, I was probably into treatment for a good year before I really asked, well, so what is my MELD score? Where am I at? And then my gastroenterologist at the time, she told me. And that's when I really woke up. And she's like, your odds are this of living 90 days. In the end, as I was getting farther along, even after being medically treated for a solid 2 years, my 90-day mortality rate at that point was 29 to 32%. That was the odds that I would not be around in 90 days. So about 3 in 7, almost to 33%, almost. So almost 1 in 3 chance of not waking up on any given day.
That's even more likely than flipping a coin and whatever it lands on, flipping it again and hitting that same,
pretty much
same heads or tails, right?
Yeah.
So what's it like? What was it like living life knowing that imminently things are going to get bad unless you got a few breaks going your way?
That's where you really have to start making your choices, because early on you're in a huge denial phase, kind of, where I was really hoping that medical treatments and things like that would just turn things around and I could just get better. And the liver does repair itself to a certain degree if it isn't really bad. And mine did. In this case, I got quite a bit better. But knowing that I had got that much better, that gave me pretty much a green light to kind of go back to insulting my body the way I was prior to that, or even more so. I had some things happen in my life and I just went off the deep end. And at that point, I did enough damage to my liver where it was uncorrectable. So, and living your life that way, knowing very well that there may not be a tomorrow, it changes your outlook on today. You know, I've spent many days just sleeping on the couch and my wife walking down the stairs and literally to check and see if I was breathing in the morning. You know, it's difficult for her. You know, I've said, and I had more than one emergency room visit during this process. And more than one time where I've had to say goodbye to my daughters, literally to their face, thinking that this could be it right here. You know, that changes your outlook on things a lot. But it also makes you strive for, you know, for tomorrow. And really, if you're really committed to getting better, you have to pull energy from wherever you can get it. And for me, that came from the people I've known and the lives I've touched, and people telling me directly to my face how I impacted their life. And it made me feel good about myself and made me feel like I wanted to be around in the future for lots of reasons. And changes the way you look at things and changes how thankful you are for things, and how you might reconsider living the rest of your life. Take your good things that you've been doing and keep doing them, and or maybe doing more.
You describe what seems to be a very powerful type of moment, interacting with your family in ways where you know that your health might be, it appears to be the reason that your life could be cut much shorter than it could be, and those interactions. But then I also think of with the alcohol, I don't know if there's anything more than the alcohol that you thought was damaging your liver. the moments where you decided or felt like you wanted to continue the lifestyle you had, I'd imagine that must also be powerful in a way that kept you on that lifestyle, or even when you describe that you had these issues and then finally felt like, oh, I can do it again and went back to it. I guess this leads back to just my understanding of the brain and what I think is an illusion of free will. These are opposing powerful forces that you're probably feeling inside of you and really struggling with. Is that a way to describe it? And what is that like, having these powerful forces against each other?
That's definitely a way to describe it, because, I very much enjoyed drinking my entire life. It was a complete part of my life. It was part of my job. And it's extremely powerful. There's a lot of people that not only struggle with quitting if they decide that that's something that they want to do, or if it's decided for them that it's something they have to do. Some people have a lot more problems in the world because of their drinking. That was not my situation. When asked by the Mayo psychiatrist, if I'm a lot different now that I'm not drinking as opposed to when I was, my wife really plainly answered, no, it really isn't that noticeable at all, because he was fine. He was totally functional. He was a great father. He wasn't abusive, and all this stuff that sometimes gets tacked on to people that have problems with drinking. I always just enjoyed it. And my body just decided it had enough, because there's only so much of anything you can do. You can't eat too much sugar. Your body at some point says enough, and you're diabetic. You can't, and for me, I drank a lot. So,
like, what does a lot mean to you?
A lot is a lot. A lot is more than a lot of people would even consider a lot. I made no bones about it to my doctor, because knowing very well that a lot of people in that situation probably lie like crazy to their doctor. I didn't see any point in doing that. So I looked at my doctor when she asked me, how much do you drink? And I told her, I said about 6 to 20 drinks a day, every day, for about 20 some years. And it didn't matter if I was sick or not, or where I was or where I wasn't. That's just the fact.
That is a lot. I guess I'm trying to understand the range of 6 to 20. Would that kind of be when you started on a given day, or what you were doing? Like, how that's a big range still. Like,
well, I mean, some days it was only 6. Some days it was.
Is it based on the people you're with, what you're doing that day, or like why the range? I'm trying to understand. Well, how you might get to 20. What would lead to a day where you'd get to 20?
Well, or just some days where different things were going on. Exactly. If I was out and if I was out of town going to some concert or something like that with a bunch of friends, we might wake up and spend all day, every waking hour, in bars or ordering drinks or just pretty much constant.
So when time allowed and the situation allowed, it would be extreme. It would be 20. In a day where you really you had a lot of kind of more important things going on.
I'm talking about a big period of time here too. I'm talking about 20 years. There were times when it was more like a 6 a day kind of time, but then there were stretches where it was 20 every day. For a long period of time.
The days you're working at a bar, were you allowed to, and whether or not you were allowed to, are those the types of days where you'd be drinking 20?
Oh, yeah.
When you're spending half the day in the bar, at least automatically,
right,
because you're working.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So when did that end? How long since you've stopped drinking, assuming you've stopped drinking?
It was 2 years ago in October.
So 2 years ago in October, you stopped, and at that point...
Because I had stopped for a decent period of time, about 2 years prior to that. And I had to create some methods for myself to... because it's not the easiest thing in the world to take out of your life when it is a big part of your existence. Anything has a level of mental addiction, whether it's a physical addiction or not. Your brain has a place for it. And overcoming that and overcoming those triggers and urges and all of these things that you see something and it just, it's time for a drink. Something happens, and I had to challenge myself a lot too. You have to go do the things that you would normally go and do and drink. You go to a wedding, I thought, well, what do people do at a wedding if you can't drink? I mean, I just couldn't fathom it really until I got to one. Really. I mean, it was like, what do you do when you go to a concert and first thing you don't do is go get an armband and then go stand in the beer line. That was just part of the deal, but, and to overcome those things and those challenges, because I'm not a person that has to not be around alcohol. You can drink right now in front of me. I don't care. I've got bottles of wine over there. Feel free to open one.
No, thank you. Not right now, Gene.
Yeah. But yeah, I had to come to terms with it myself, because I've seen in my life what doesn't work for people that attempt to cut down or stop. And then I've seen what does, and I had to develop my own kind of mental methodology to get past those sometimes daily challenges, sometimes not so much. And now it's really not that big of a deal. It's not like they come up as much as they did early on.
Can you explain what does work for Gene Leppala right now?
It's a bigger picture, but because, I mean, you can crave anything at any given moment. And really, it's just all about, convincing yourself that whether you have to take a step back it's easy enough to have a craving and then say, oh, what the hell, and just grab something and open it. Mm-hmm. It's another thing to just take even a 5-minute step back and then ask yourself the question again, do I want to have a drink now? Do I want, or take a 20-minute break, and say, all right, did you really want that or not? And then you can more uncloudedly, after asking yourself that question, answer it and say, you know what, probably not. I've made it 20 minutes, whatever, It's just easier to kind of step away from it and reanalyze and then kind of look at it that way.
So the first step, it sounds like the way you're describing it, is instead of just reacting and doing it, is to first train yourself to step back and allow your future self 5 or 20 minutes later.
Because there's people that can give themselves any excuse in the world. Today I'm going to drink. I'm only going to have one. One doesn't work. It doesn't work out for anybody that's a regular drinker. You don't sit down and have a glass of wine. It just doesn't go that way. When it's one is going to be two. If you finish your first one, you're wondering where the hell the wine bottle is because you're ready for the second one, the third one, the fourth one. And so not even having that first one is one of the biggest keys, because the idea of drinking a little would be a ridiculous challenge. Honestly.
Is it as hard today as it might have been 2+ years ago when you went to that most recent day of not drinking?
Well, so yes, very much so. I mean, at that point, I couldn't even couldn't picture a day of not drinking or whatever. I'd watch Good Morning America at, whatever o'clock in the morning, and I'd literally look at the people on TV and wonder what time they had to wake up to have their first martini before they went on the air. That was my reality in my own head. It's like, well, they must have a couple of drinks before they do this or something, but because I just couldn't really picture starting a day without it.
You kind of assumed that was basically everyone's reality.
Well, not really, but I knew it was mine, so, and it becomes a lot easier. It becomes not even a thought anymore, really. It's not like I wouldn't enjoy another drink. I don't know, but I just know that for a lot of obvious physical reasons and stuff like that, that's just not something that's in the cards for me. I hope I had a good time doing what I did when I did it, because,
So right now we're looking at, let's see, 2 years and 3 months, 4 months, somewhere in there since your last drink. And because, and we'll get back to the liver transplant situation, because you were able to stop, it made actually getting a liver transplant possible. I'm assuming if you didn't stop,
it was a requirement.
So
I had been a non-drinker for a year prior to going into the Mayo Clinic for evaluation. My gastroenterologist had encouraged me for a very long time to go to the Mayo and be checked out and try to become part of their program. And I actually kind of fought the whole situation because I was personally in denial that I was really that bad. As obvious as the data was that was set in front of me, I was just convinced that I could get better somehow with the drugs that they were giving me that weren't really there to make you better. They were there to keep you alive is really what those were there for. And so finally, when I did go to the Mayo, they put you through an evaluation, and part of that evaluation is just to see if you could possibly be part of their program. And then they have requirements. And one of their requirements is a 90-day intensive outpatient treatment program of your choice. And so you find one of those and you show up, whatever the program requires. For me, it was twice a week. And you go through classes. They want you to be prepared for not only your own current sobriety, but the future, if they should find you and give you a liver, to be prepared for that future, because you might be depressed. There's lots of reasons why you might go back to drinking, and that's not what they want you to do. It's not going to be a successful outcome. And so they want you to have all the tools available. So they require you to be part of AA, which I wasn't. And so they require you to find, there's a bazillion different AA classes of all different types. You can find something that suits your needs or a time of day that suits your needs. They required you to find a sponsor. And so that's someone that you work with that, you can bounce ideas off, or they can give you advice and things of the sort. That person, you just sign off on the fact that you're there all the time. And by all the time, they require you to go once a week. But, and those are requirements you have to meet to even be considered for their program. And then they take a look at what your thoughts are, for me, they're like, you are a reasonable physical specimen. You're otherwise healthy person. And, you seem to have the drive and the knowledge and the willingness to move forward and be a successful organ transplant recipient. And so they look at all these things to make sure that this is going to be a successful mission for them, because they happen more rarely than you might think.
So that was the assessment they had for you, and the one I assume that you needed to receive to even have a chance.
Yeah,
to get
in order to be put on the list, there's a bunch of heads that have to come together. Everyone that's talked to you, your lead hepatologist, your drug and alcohol counselor at the Mayo itself, you're just a whole team of people. There's like 20 people on this board in order to decide whether you are going to be put on the list. And once you're on the list, that becomes a whole different aspect. I remember getting the phone call saying I'd been accepted and I am now on the list. But that means a lot of different things. Basically, you're waiting, and you're waiting for a lot of different factors.
So when you knew you were finally on the list, still, what was the likelihood that they gave you, or did they even give you a likelihood that you would eventually receive a liver, or the time frame, or how was that presented to you?
That becomes a little fuzzy, because how they work the list is you have a MELD score, your combination of different blood tests and different sorts of things that basically say how in need you are, how unhealthy you are. And they want to give the least healthy people, the first crack at available organs. They want to help the people that are closest to, the closest to death, essentially, which seemed a little strange to me in some ways, because at some point you get too unhealthy where even surviving a surgery becomes iffy. Mm-hmm. But that's just the way they do it. And then the other factors that come into play is the donor has to be about your size as far as a human. They can't take a 300-pound man's liver and give it to a 98-pound Asian girl. Mm-hmm. Just doesn't work out. And they have to be your blood type. So all those things have to match. And if they don't, and if you aren't on the top of that list because of your score, and something else comes up, and somebody else would get the organ. So in my case, I was called once, and you basically wait. You wait around. You wait for the phone to ring. You make sure your phone's always charged. I had 4 extra batteries for my phone that were just handy for me in case, and you always answer it. You don't turn it off when you go to a movie. And it could be middle of the night. A lot of times those calls do come in the middle of the night because a lot of accidents happen at night. Mm-hmm. So you're just ready. And when you see the caller ID come up, you wonder, wow, it's something you mentally kind of try to prepare for, but it's not happening until it happens.
Remind me again what day in September you got the transplant?
That would be the 15th.
And so if you can describe, I don't know how many days before you get it that you hear that you're going to get it, but if you can go back to even a few days before receiving that call, what was your health? What was your state of mind in those moments leading up to the somewhat random time that you got that phone call?
That early September was just a roller coaster for me because I was actually called in. I was down for a visit to the Mayo because I had been called into the ER at one point at early part of September. One of my blood tests came back. I have my blood drawn weekly. It's part of the deal. You go and have your blood checked every week. And one of my tests, my sodium test, came back so low that my doctor insisted that I come check myself into the Mayo immediately. So when I got that call, I drove down there because at a certain level, and I'll use a couple numbers even though they're not going to mean anything to anybody, but at a level of 120 for your sodium level, anything below that, they basically deem as you're inoperable at that point. You're not going to survive a surgery.
And where were you at?
So they basically put you on hold on the list because they're not going to give you something. At that point, I was at a 116.
So you had dipped below the 120.
Right. And they said 123 was kind of my watch point, but I didn't really know what that meant. And I didn't know there was a 120 line until after the fact. And hearing that news and knowing very well that I was out of consideration really at that point, unless they did something. I spent 3 days down there and they got my count back up into the low 120s. And I'd done a lot of work to achieve the things necessary for a sodium diet. It's kind of counterintuitive because to get a higher sodium level, you actually have to take in less sodium. So I was on under 1,000 milligrams a day of sodium, which is nearly impossible in the modern human's diet. They wanted me to be under 1,400. I thought I would just kill it. I'm going to do this really right. I tracked every single bite of food from every chart and every possible thing I could, cataloged everything every day, and added up all my meals and all my lunches and all this stuff. And I had my weeks long of da-da-da-da-da. And it's amazing what you find out about different foods and what you can do and can't do and what a little bit can mean. And also, it has to do with the amount of fluid. You have to actually restrict your fluid intake. So I was to the point where you could only drink about a liter to a liter and a half of water a day is all you can consume. So you have to measure that. And that includes if you have a cup of soup, that's liquid. Mm-hmm. If you eat a piece of celery, there's a liquid in that. So that was an extreme challenge.
So generally, consuming more liquid than that is better, but for the purposes of the sodium.
Basically, what they're looking for is a concentration, and basically to get that number higher, you need to bring your liquid level in your body lower, so your sodium concentration becomes higher. Your sodium with your active sodium in your body, and that doesn't increase by taking in more sodium. That actually decreases. It's kind of weird. It does sound completely counterintuitive, but you're just trying to bring up the concentration. So you need to really limit your liquids and things like that to get it up to a certain point. So at that point, I'd gone back in a week later for a checkup, a 1 week checkup to make sure my sodium levels were in check. And he's like, "You're good. We're all fine." And that's when he told me that 120 was inoperable. And I went, wow, I was there. I was almost, put out with the cat, so to speak. And while I was in the Mayo Clinic, I got the phone call from the transplant center. And she said, "Well, our computer shows you're already here in the building, but we just found an organ for you." And I was like, your reactions are, wow, that particular event did not go well, didn't work. The harvested organ turned out to not be viable. It's
not viable for you or not for transplant?
Certain things have to happen. And in this case, this person was on life support. And there's, without going into too many details, there's certain ways that they have to die quickly in order for it to be the most effective thing. Otherwise, because the body immediately, the way the organs react, they almost get immediately damaged by certain processes of death. And so this was deemed, if I was really, really ridiculously sick, which I was close to, but not quite there, they may have considered transplanting it anyway and dealing with all of the possible outcomes that come from using a not so viable liver. But they wanted to put something more prime. As I looked at it, it's, I don't know if you remember the grocery store item Steakums, those cheap little.
I don't.
Okay. It USDA prime beef instead of Steakums. Let's just put it that way. If that makes any sense. So I wanted a good organ. I'm like, okay, but it did put me into, I was walking out of the hospital, without an organ, and I was very upset.
So ultimately, did they turn it down for you, or did you turn it down?
Well, I spent that entire night in the hospital waiting. I was sitting there and waiting for the news, because I knew when they gave me the time frame of when they were going to, the transplant team was in place and when they were going to disconnect the donor and when I would roughly know. And then they came in to tell me that it didn't go well. So you would not be getting a transplant today. So when I found out that I was getting my actual final organ, was a couple weeks later. I got a phone call from my chief surgeon. She's the chief of surgery at the Mayo. So gotta like that. I got the right person on my side on the team. So, and she just called to see how I was doing because she knew I was going to be going through some mental situations from not getting a transplant. And then you basically are back to wondering when it's going to happen. When am I going to be up here on the list? Because they knew that this was a dodgy liver situation. It was, it falls into a certain class of only sometimes do these work anyway, where they call you in and only sometimes is it going to be viable enough for them to transplant. So they knew going into it that it was a 50-50, basically is what they call it. It's almost exact 50-50, whether it's going to work and you're ultimately going to end up with a transplant. So I knew that going into it. And, but so she discussed that a little bit, but at the same time, she had the news that I had a new organ on the way. And she's like, okay, and by the way, we've got another organ for you. So kind of changed my mood right away. At that point, I'd accepted it. I'd accepted the fact I didn't get the other one. I was getting kind of cool with things, getting my groove back on. I didn't feel real crappy because on any given day, you could feel absolutely terrible. And it could come upon you in what I kind of called a thrush, where you just kind of like, you're fine 1 second, and then all of a sudden the wheels fall off and you have to grab onto something. You feel so horrible. And you just wonder, wow, how bad is this going to get? Am I going to be better 5 minutes from now or 10 minutes from now, or am I just going on the slide? And so I felt pretty good. I felt like I was going to make it until they called me. But at that point, I didn't think I would probably be called off the list until December. Knowing what I knew and what knowledge I'd gained about the list and how many donors there were and how big the list is and what numbers they're taking currently and, some of that data. And in my case, this is really where the story gets super special. I was effectively gifted this liver. It's a process, struggling for the name of it right now. Anyway, where someone has lost someone, like recently right now, something just happened. Mm-hmm. And in my case, they knew of me, knew of my story somehow, and they wanted me to have their loved one's liver. And I had no idea who that person was or could be.
You do now?
We still have not gone through the process through the Mayo where you contact or attempt contact. The Mayo likes you to stay away from that for a number of months because your best day was their worst day.
Yeah.
In their family. So
sure.
They want you to hang back on. And the hospital mediates that between, the contact to see if they even want to be contacted. Do they want to know how you are? Do they want to know anything about your story, or do they just not want to talk to you? And or do you, personally? I mean, obviously, I'd love to say a lot of things to these people, but that's also, it's completely up to them. But I have ideas. I thought it might be, easier to figure out, but through some research and things like that, I have some very good ideas, and but it's nothing I really can share.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
So
let's get back and see if we can.
They did tell me things like the donor's age, things like that.
Were all those things fairly well in line with you as they needed to be? Since if this,
blood
if
type,
they chose you, well, yeah, it might not have even been right.
It might not have even been right, but surprisingly, all of those factors fell into line. Blood type, size. The only difference is age. The donor was in their 20s. It was a motorcycle accident, massive head trauma. And so, my liver won't be my age until I'm 77 years old, really. Mm-hmm. So hence why it's probably functioning as well as it is.
Since you're mentioning age, for the heck of it, how old are you?
I turned 50 this year.
Okay. Well, happy birthday. Wait, thanks. This year meaning January already?
No.
Okay.
No. This year being the previous year in August.
Okay.
So I'm 50 and whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that day and then leading out of it. Like, would you remember going into into surgery and like what that's like, knowing that this is your best and maybe final opportunity to correct this thing that otherwise will kill you?
Right. Yeah, because that's precisely where I was at that point. My days were extremely numbered. They are able to put together what they call a 90-day mortality figure based on your tests. Your tests yield a MELD score, a combination of all these different tests that give you a number. That people have got transplants when they were a 17 meld or a 25 meld or a 29 meld. In my case, I was into the low 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was extremely sick. And but they can take people that are in my like situation and look back into their history and very easily determine how many of these people lived and for how long they lived without a transplant. And in my case, given my MELD score that had remained pretty much constant for quite a while, even though I was getting a little bit sicker, not because of doing anything, but trying to do everything right. You know, it was just still continuing to get worse and worse, no matter what we did or no matter how hard I tried to make it to the next day. My mortality rate at that point, my 90-day odds of survival, so to speak, they had me at right between 29% and 32% were my chances that I would not be here. So about 1 in 3 or 3 in 7, depending on how you look at it.
But as you described earlier, you were kind of at a similar number for a while, or was it different?
That was the thing is, yeah, I was kind of at this level where, given the fact that I had that number for longer than 90 days, that was not just a new number for me. That was something that I'd been living with for a number of months, and due to my own willpower or whatever I was doing or whatever was bringing me to the next day or whatever I was drawing from in order to keep the wheels turning, I was part of the other, 68% that didn't go away. And they can extrapolate that out to a year. For instance, in my case, my year mortality rate was closer, it was 65%. So my odds of living a year were about, 35% were my odds of still being around if I would have not got a transplant for a year.
And you got the transplant. And how successful are those actually? And what was your mindset going into that?
Well, that's actually somewhat, it's kind of a non-concern when you're actually going in for the transplant. The transplant surgery is extremely complicated, even though there's very few things to really connect. It takes good 5+ hours, but most people live through the transplant. It's a very high number. It's into the 90s.
Okay.
There are odds that you won't make it out of the operating room, sure, but they aren't even 10%. But there's some percentage. It usually has a lot to do with being under anesthesia for 5 hours. Is really one of the biggest issues. Not that the transplant isn't successful or something like that. So my particular liver came in from Colorado, which is outside of our zone, so to speak, because they divide the United States up into zones for organ transplant. But being that this is what they call a directed liver, I finally came up with the word. A directed liver, it had to be brought here from elsewhere, from Colorado specifically.
Do you know how they got it to Rochester?
They fly it in.
Okay. On its own, or
there's a company in Colorado that's what they do, but strangely, I have a odd side story through my the connection of this story really doesn't matter, but it's essentially a friend of my sister's chiropractor. In his part-time life, he is a person that goes and procures organs from other places. He flies off and picks these things up and brings them back. Sometimes they're taken by private jet, specifically, and but he, when asked, specifically remembers going to Colorado to get my. I've never met this guy. He was with it. But yeah, he works somewhere up in northern Minneapolis. And he remembers going to Colorado because that's not normally where he goes, because he usually only travels within the zone.
Okay.
And you're basically sitting in your in your room, all prepped for surgery. You're all scrubbed down with all their super scrub stuff. So you're all bright and shiny and clean as you've ever been in your life. And you hear the helicopter. You hear it landing on the roof. You hear it come in.
So you're there waiting, and this guy that you were aware of through a connection but don't know.
I didn't find that out until months later.
But he was your liver courier. He traveled to get it and brought it back for you.
Yep.
Wow.
And then you hear it land on the roof. And then they start to give you the timeline of when they're going to roll you away. You know? And you start to go, okay, you know, because you're waiting around. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting for it to show up. You're ready. So I don't remember how long I was there. One of the things that they require is you have to be within a certain distance of the Mayo Clinic when you're on the list.
Okay.
You can't be outside of X number of hours by car. You can't be X number of hours away by public airline transportation, because public flights are not reliable in their mind. If you have your own private aircraft, that's a different story. But you can't be, for instance, I couldn't drive any farther away than like my parents' place in northern Minnesota. That's as far away as I could be. And I needed special permission to go even that far, because I did do that once. But they usually don't like you to be any farther than like 4 hours away from the Mayo itself. And it's an hour and a half drive from our house. Yep. So that's one of the things that led in my favor for being on the list, was my proximity. Because if an organ came up and it was between me with my score and someone else with a similar score, and they happened to be in North Dakota somewhere, they would more likely give it to me if they were on crunch time.
Okay.
You know, because it would take longer for that person to get there.
So you received the transplant 5 hours, and I guess now if you can summarize that in the, was it now, four or so months since then, what has this process been like?
It's surprising. I honestly thought for the first month I would be roughly incapacitated on the couch, under a heavy amount of pain pills due to the incision or what have you. Pretty much be useless. And you're also on a very, very large dose of immunosuppressives to keep your body from rejecting the liver. So that means you can catch anything. You have to go through, gut your house, wipe down everything. Anywhere you go, anything you do is you're carrying stuff around with you to wipe down surfaces and hand sanitizer when people walk in the house, and all of these different levels of things that they want you to do to protect yourself from. Because if you get sick, well, if something is near you that would get you sick, you will get it. And if you get sick, your body's not equipped to deal with it because it has no immune system.
And
they basically turn off your immune system.
That's right away.
Yeah, immediately.
Is it as extreme right now as it was?
I just, at my 4-month, was taken off of, I'm still on multiple immunosuppressants. They basically put you on a few of them. And they just took me off one of the major ones at 4 months. So that I was taking 1,800 milligrams of that particular drug daily. So I am less immunosuppressed than I was then, and far stronger as well. I mean, your body, you're pretty weak. You're pretty beat up at that point.
Describe where you've come from 4 months ago to now with your daily activity and capabilities.
Well, again, that's where it really became surprising. I mean, I was out of the hospital sooner than I would have ever thought. But you still have to stay within daily meeting times, because you go back and forth to the Mayo pretty much every couple of days for something, for a follow-up, for a test, for whatever, for about 30 days after your transplant. So I very, very happily and luckily had some incredible accommodations at a relative's house that she opened up her house to us and basically said, you have the run of the entire full first floor of the house. I'll just move into my basement and, stay here as long as you want. But even that period of time went so well. Just like them getting me out of the hospital. They got me out of the hospital itself a lot sooner than they would for most people, or for almost all people. I pretty much tied the record for fastest out of the hospital. There was one other person, I guess, that pretty much got released at the same time historically. And then the month was not a month. They decided after 20 some days that I was good to go. I could go home and just follow up with future visits, and things were just going that well from the start. There's just nothing has been a challenge. Nothing has been, there's been stuff. There's a bunch of stuff that's no fun about it. You've been cut in half. It's not like a small incision that they just like squeeze a liver through. They cut you in half both ways. You've got a pretty interesting looking scar when you're done with all this. And they get a lot of elbow room to get in there. And the drugs take their effect. They beat you down pretty hard. Headaches are total pain in the ass. Just the most difficult thing that you can imagine a headache being, because they just come on so strong and so immediate. I mean, the best way I could possibly describe it is, that picture of an eagle swooping down over a calm pond and grabbing a fish out of the water. Yeah. That picture of its talons in the top of its head with one claw through the fish's eyeball, and the fish is like, what the hell just happened? And that's pretty much what these headaches feel like. They come on just that fast, and they are that hard and that strong. And
how often?
It was a couple times a day where you just they just slam you, and then they kind of just go away quite quickly, minutes. And you still remember that you had a headache, and you still kind of feel a dulling kind of thing, but it's just bizarre. They just slam you. And, they thought about maybe some possible treatments for him and stuff like that, but I just kind of decided I'd deal with them, I guess.
And how long, or 4 months after, how long before things are completely back to normal, would you say, if they're not already, which I don't think they're quite back to normal yet?
Well, that's the one thing I would say is I'm definitely healthier now than I was 4 or 5 months ago. When I was really sick, I was really sick. There's a lot of things I couldn't do. Is one of the other things, your liver touches a lot of things in your body, and it causes a lot of different levels of things like ammonia in your brain, and that causes a ton of fogginess. I was in the ER one time for that. My ammonia level was at like 180 when 40 is super high normal. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you are just at a loss for anything that's around you. You are confused as you could possibly be confused. And, so compared to being sick, yeah, I'm fantastic. Am I as good as I'm ever going to be? That probably won't happen till about the 6-month point. One of the factors is they have you on a number of drugs, and the drugs have their effects. And as they taper those off more, you'll notice a lot less of those effects. I've been taken off 3 drugs now, or whittled down slowly to the point where they're at 0. Mm-hmm. And those are noticeable. Last night was not a fun night for me because I just got taken off a drug, and it was like being I don't know what it was like. It wasn't like being a heroin addict because there were no like DTs, but yeah, you didn't feel right. Your body was used to having this stuff in you. And I felt horrible, just absolutely freaking horrible. And that's just from them not being there, and I feel better today, or kind of better. So, but yeah, I'd say come about 6 months, give or take, post-transplant, I'd be about as good as I'd expect to be. I don't know how good you're ever going to be, but yeah. But I'd say that's probably as good as it's going to get.
Okay, so I'll personally keep track of that and see how you're doing. But let's turn the conversation the fact that we know each other, just in brief, is we used to work together, but in this 4-month time period, one of the other people we used to work with that individually, like the three of us never hung out outside of the workplace. One of these people that became a very good friend of both you and I in the last few years is Josh Torgeson, who, of course, we lost him to a car accident of his own a couple months ago. And I guess I'd heard, I think from you in talking to him also, like he was involved in some of these aspects of like transportation for you, at least occasionally, with you needing to get down to Rochester from the Twin Cities area here occasionally. Like I know that happened, but how close were you with him in the last couple of years?
Yeah. And in that situation, Josh was the one that drove me back from my transplant. Anyone could have. I have family and things like that, but I specifically, he had offered anything, as Josh would always do. He was always there for a person in a million different ways. And, I just said, you know what? I want Josh to drive me home. Mm-hmm. I want to drive home with him. I want to listen to music with him. I want to talk to him. And, and so he just bounced down and picked me up and threw me in the Subaru, and we zipped over here. But what was your further question there?
I guess just me as a friend of his, and I guess for the last couple of years, just an acquaintance from a distance of yours, because we haven't seen each other prior to today. I guess it's been 2.5 years.
Yeah, that's about accurate.
And I know about at that time, I kind of thought, and I pulled back an old message. I know I intended that we'd get together and hang out, but we hadn't. And if not for some of these combination of things, like me having this podcast, or I know being back in touch with you more directly after Josh passed away, and knowing that you're going through your own health issues, somehow the combination leads us to see each other today. And I'm happy that we're finally reconnecting. But I know that in this situation, we both are feeling a void in our lives because Josh isn't there anymore for us. And he was one of my best friends. And I guess I want to understand where your friendship with him developed and how strong it was, and what types of things you would do together, or how often you'd like talk to each other.
Right. I mean, Josh and I, we met at work, and we just started, talking about things, and quickly discovered that we had a lot of just common interests. He was extremely interested in a lot of the things that I was extremely interested in. He had a huge love for exotic automobiles, particularly Porsches and things of the sort. I've owned a Porsche since I was 18 years old. And so we had a lot to talk about as far as things like that. We went to a lot of things like Cars and Coffee that occurs here in Shakopee. It's one of the largest weekly gatherings of exotic cars in the nation. And people they used to be over here in Eden Prairie, and now it's at the fairgrounds over at Canterbury, and people just show up with all their amazing exotic machines, old and new and all different sorts of stuff. And we'd go there, and he's a huge lover of coffee and cigars and stuff. And we'd link up and go out for a coffee and just sit around and talk. He was just always a super interesting person to talk to. His outlook on so many things was more than an outlook. It was just, everything was thought about. It wasn't thought out, but it was thought about. He considered everything that just occurred around him a lot more so than most any human being does.
He did it without a bias, really. Like he wouldn't try to defend any of his actions when presented with new information. He was pretty...
No, he was a total equal opportunity employer. Yeah, it was just like he'd question some things, and he had his own personal opinions, but they weren't just like set in stone. He understood that other people might think differently, and he was okay with that. He understands that it's a big world, and you can think different ways and follow different paths. And he did wonder a little bit that, that some people didn't really, they just kind of took life very casually and didn't really give some things probably the weight that they should have. You know, his take on being a father and being just anything. I mean, it really showed just in his daily actions. That was one of the things just about him. He just always seemed to have a well thought out take on kind of everything. And it was just super fun to talk to him all the time. And we'd go bouncing around. I mean, he bought a BMW not long ago. I used to work for BMW. And so, of course, I know a lot about the product. So we'd go driving around in his car, and he'd just, unlike so many people, he'd let me use it at my whim. You know, just some people are very protective of their fine automobile, and he just thought cars are meant to be driven. So it's like, come on over, pick it up. You want to take out a friend? I'd go out with a very close friend of mine. We went around the Lake Minnetonka, and stopped off at a couple places. At the time, I was obviously the sober driver, so it was just kind of fun to go out and do that. So, and just never had a problem with it. You know, he's like, go ahead, take my car. So, and that was just the way he was. He was a very, very giving type of person. And he had that philosophy of like, okay, if you do wrap my tree around a phone pole or something like that, it's not going to be the end of my life. It's a car. You know, it's okay.
Yeah, he's maybe, I don't know, I can't necessarily rank people necessarily, but he's one of the best people I'd ever known. And there's certainly an absence, because I think of things and I think of him, and he's like the perfect person to talk to about whatever. And now he's not there. So there's this void that I'm sure other people will fill in their own ways, but I'm going through that. And I, of course, I was gone. Like, I saw him. We recorded the podcast a couple days before he passed away.
Right. Which is a extremely interesting thing to listen to. I mean, for so many reasons for me. It was brilliant that you captured it, or maybe luck or something.
Yeah. But I don't know the word to describe it. And I have some more recordings with him. So I'm kind of trying to think when I'm going to use the next one and kind of edit that and use it. But I think having this conversation with you, for anyone that listens to people I know show on a regular basis, will kind of bring it back to him, and just getting other people's perspectives on like, you know, instead of me talking to him only, so you've known him pretty well, and obviously was a great friend of yours. So trying to bring, I think there's some themes I'm going to have as I continue to talk to people. One of them is going to be occasionally Josh, because the way he thought influenced the way that I thought as much or better than anyone else, to really be open about things that I might not have considered before, and to really make an impression on me of trying to live my life in the best way possible. So that, and it ties into some other things, but with his thinking, we're kind of getting into this intellectual humility, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So before we get into specifically a discussion about intellectual humility, can you is there something that Josh, that you really learned from him, that he changed your thinking on, or at least embraced your thoughts change a little bit?
I mean, there's a number of things, but you know, I guess one of the things first and foremost is I've had the opportunity in my life, just mostly because of what I've done for a living, being a bartender, bar manager, and stuff like that. I know a tremendous amount of people, and I've got to know a lot more people than your average person would get to know. I've got to know some people extremely well in a lot of deep conversations that we've had, that you don't just normally just walk up to somebody and all of a sudden you're in a big conversation with them. It's just not really a thing that happens naturally in the world. But these things were just part of the job. But also part of that is I do know a lot of people, and there's only a few handfuls that I really consider to be very close friends of mine, and that are super important to me. And because I understand they're, for some reason, super important people. Maybe that's only to me, but they're just extremely special. And Josh was one of those people. And he had exactly that. He had some outlooks on things. You know, I find myself harking back to just simple thoughts that he would have, like I think about being a dad, and he would say the simplest thing, like, I just want to be present in my child's life. And I don't want to be obtrusive to how they decide they want to grow up, because it is their life. I can help them, guide them, and do whatever. But I feel like just being present, just being there and not missing it, is an important thing. And I'm like, wow, that's simple, but really very deep. Just be present in their life. I mean, that's a huge thing, and it's simple as hell. And that's the way it was. He would have these simple conclusions that he would come up with that were just like, wow, that's pretty deep. And as you put it, there is a void. There's immediately, because we would always have ongoing conversations. He was always out working and stuff like that. And we'd have text conversations going back and forth and throughout any given day. And anytime I came across some neat little thing about, some car thing, or we were both big fans of Elon Musk and his doings. Mm-hmm. So we would have discussions about that and him and all sorts of stuff, from how uncomfortable he was, and in a forum where he's being interviewed or something, and just kind of be like, wow, but then he says this and it's so brilliant, but he seems to be so uncomfortable in front of people, but and yeah, there's just so many things. When I do lose someone, one of the things that I personally like to do, or encourage other people to do, or what have you, is just picture something about that person that you thought was really an outstanding human quality that they had. And take that thing, if it's one thing or two things or whatever comes to your mind, if you think about it, take that and try to make it part of how you live your life. If it's a good thing, maybe you try to emulate it. Maybe try to, see if you can act more like that, or look at life that way. And for me, that is a way where their personal philosophies or their personal sense of existence does continue on, no matter what you believe or don't believe in, higher powers or somebody watching over you, whatever. That is a way that you can bring that person with you into the future, possibly teach your children that lesson in life. I mean, it becomes a thing, and grabbing whatever that is for anybody that's experienced them in their life, I think is a great way to move forward from the loss. It came as obviously quite a stunner. It was, in all definitions, an accident, a sudden, unexpected thing that occurred and had the worst possible outcome.
And I guess comparing to your situation, since the thought came to me, like that was sudden, unexpected, and then he's gone. Whereas you, I suppose, for some time and your family were facing the possibility that something like that, not like that, but you might be gone. But it positions you in a much different way.
That's a great point.
And you've come out of it.
That's a great point, because I've thought this, because I've known people, also one of the tragic things of knowing a lot of people is you know a lot of people that die.
Yeah, for sure.
And, but I've had other things where I'm like, wow, I'm really lucky that I did make it through this. Because other people didn't or haven't, or even since I got my transplant, I've had, besides him, I've had another friend that passed away tragically as well. And it's just one of those things where you kind of go, wow, I'm not going to say it should have been me or something like that. Why was it him? But it's just like, wow, that was just so not, it shouldn't have been a thing. It didn't have to be a thing, but it was. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of have to grasp the fragility and reality of that it was just an instant in time that just changed everything. You know, the void was instantly there. I found myself reaching for my cell phone I still do. I'll walk through a parking lot and see some car or something and feel like I want to make a comment about something, and I'll reach for my phone and about to text him. I almost texted him 4 times the day after he died, and I couldn't help myself. It was so ingrained in my regular existence that it was just like, I knew he wasn't alive anymore, but I was still actually going and grabbing or reaching for my phone and then going, dude, he's not there. You know, you can't send him a message.
And that's, to me, a couple thoughts as what you were saying there. One is, as I think I even talked about that was episode 9 of this podcast with Josh, is I plan, like, my mental intention is I think I'm going to live a very long time. Like, I don't know how everyone thinks about that, but I really think I'm going to live a long time. And I'm very aware that with that is basically everyone I know and love that's older than me, especially, but some that are younger than me might go before me. So if I'm to live a long time, I'm going to have to deal with this a lot. And I think I like my grandma, I have one grandparent living, and I have had this conversation with her, and maybe at some point I'll have this discussion with her on the podcast if that comes about. But, you know, basically everyone that she's known and loved from her generation's pretty much gone before her. And that, yeah, I know that's
I've seen this too, where I'm just like, wow, I mean, you know, the older you get, good for you, but you basically get to see all your friends die and a good part of your family, and even people that are far younger than you.
Yeah, it's just the math, I guess, of human reality and existence, and the fact that we don't live forever. That's those that live the longest.
I think a lot of people think that that's why we ignore things like what we're doing to our health or what we're not doing to be healthier. We just figure we're going to be fine until we really get that wake-up call. For me, I mean, I knew what I was doing wasn't really healthy. I didn't think it was really going to, you know, become this bad of a situation as early as it did, but I had plenty of reason to believe that it would. And now that this change has happened in my world, I don't know what's going to kill me. I don't know how long I'm going to live. I mean, I basically spent years of my life thinking that I was going to die really young. That was I just knew it.
Because within the last few years, you're saying?
Yeah, I knew that I was either going to die soon, like days, weeks, months, years. But even prior to that, I kind of figured, you know, when I was just getting sick, I knew I wasn't going to be a 60-year-old person.
But now you think you're going to be 60
now I don't
beyond.
know. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be 95 or 100 or something. Yeah. I don't know what I'm.
The most unhealthy.
It's wide open.
The most unhealthy aspect of your body is now the youngest part of your body.
Right.
So I guess in theory that could help you live a much longer time than you would have, even with your own liver somewhat healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, if I would have lived a perfectly or reasonably healthy life my entire life, I would still have, you know, a 50-year-old liver in me that has gone through a certain amount of damage. And now I don't. I have one that's half that age.
It's strange things to think about. And I like thinking about these things. And as you were mentioning something about Josh to take forward to myself, I believe I've been a pretty good listener my whole life, but he was maybe the best listener I've ever known. Right up there. Like
he is. He absolutely. And I don't know if he was just listening right or if he was asking the right questions, because it was simple, but all of a sudden, you know, you'd find yourself talking, you know, and not just something about something you wanted to say or had planned on saying, but you were just there. You were in that moment, but he was absolutely taking in every word of it and listening to everything that you had to say and valued your idea and opinion to whatever was on the board. It was amazing.
And this might not be true, but even as you were saying that, I was listening to you, but what inevitably happens is something you say springs a new thought into my mind, a thought I can't control, of course, that jumps into my mind. and I'm ready to share it with you. And I think I'd imagine, and I don't know if this is a learned behavior he had or just somehow he was fortunate. I'd say fortunate because his listening skills played into his intelligence and his wisdom on some of these thoughts. Where like I'm ready to say this thing. I'm letting you finish. I'm listening to you, but I'm eager to tell you what just came to my mind. I don't know if he had that. I think he just listened till the end, basically, or at least I shouldn't say he didn't do that at all. But he would be much more comfortable listening for someone to finish their entire thought, and then I think he would take a few extra seconds, and then he would come with his own. He wasn't ready and waiting.
Yeah, I don't know if he was taking that time to like truly analyze it and understand what it was, that not only what you were saying, but what it meant. But yeah, he absolutely did that, because I will find myself when I come with a thought about what 2 people are talking about or 5 people are talking about. If there's a thought, I will interject my thought. You know, I have no problem projecting my voice above others.
It's our ego. We're so smart. We know everything. We want to tell everybody everything.
Oh, it comes right out there. It does. And it might be a character fault at times, you know, but for him, it was the biggest character plus. It was unbelievable. And it was, you know, if even people that didn't know him exceptionally well noticed it. I noticed things like in comments after his accident, that's one of the things, you know, where just like a simple sentence, like somebody would say, he was the best listener, because he was. And I don't know if it's totally innate in him, like you said, or if it's something he learned or became valuable to him for some reason, but it was valuable enough to him personally to do it well.
And I think he learned better because he didn't have these thoughts bouncing around his mind to detract from his ability to listen to whatever it was that there was to listen to. And so he was able to take in more information more completely, I would assume, this is my assumption on it, and be able to just learn in a way that most of us struggle to do, at least at times. He was better at it, and that's why I think he was so smart, wise, and the way that he thought was just deeper, stronger, and better than the average person, and something that I'm grateful that I learned from him. And now I think even you and I having this conversation now about the way he was a listener, I'm going to see if somehow actively in my mind I can do better at what I think he did well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that one should incorporate into their life. It'd be a huge positive for anyone, obviously, but it's just a huge skill set for him. It was uncanny.
Gene, let's transition now to the article that I've referenced. In episode 15 of the podcast with Matt Donnelly, I brought this up for the first time. It's just been a few weeks since I came across this article about intellectual humility. It was written by Brian Resnick. It's posted on Vox.com, and it'll be easy to find a link to this article in the episode show notes from today, because I'd really like people to take a look at this. Like, the themes of the podcast are kind of coming together as now I'm into the middle teens, but one's going to be things to do with Josh, as we just talked about. It's always going to be me finding different people from my life that I think have interesting stories to tell, some of which have had greater or lesser impacts on me directly. But the thing about the podcast the most is I've changed my thinking over the years, and I want to bring some of these topics, and I didn't really have a good word or a good way to describe what I've realized. And then suddenly one of my Facebook friends, a Facebook friend I don't really know that well, posted this article, and somehow with the sheer timing of it, I saw it. And so I came across this article about intellectual humility, and it's like, this is exactly what I think the world needs more of. And I think I have it. I hope. I don't know. It's a part of intellectual humility. I'm aware that maybe I'm not as intellectually humble as I want to be. But as the article states, and we'll get into it from here, intellectual humility is simply, quote, the recognition that the things you believe in might in fact be wrong. And there's much more to it, and maybe we'll get into a little bit more of that. But I thinking about having you on the podcast this week, I thought, well, I want to talk about this. I could have Gene on at some point. I'm going to send this to Gene, get his reaction. And you typed a lot of information, a lot of thoughts that came from it. So I knew that you could talk about it. So after reading that article, what struck you, if anything, especially?
Well, immediately, it just, like you said, it's like a topic that kind of jumped out at you and made you think, wow, I kind of want to read this and want to kind of discover what we're talking about here, intellectual humility. And immediately, as it was defined, examples started coming to mind, good and bad, about people that have an idea and think they're right and might be proven wrong or might be wrong, or times in your life that you thought you were right but weren't right, and being able and willing as a human being to admit you were wrong and be comfortable enough with that, and maybe not have any real serious repercussions or feel like you'd look differently to others or look stupid to somebody or whatever. You're kind of almost defending your own ground, your own position to, I don't know, keep from hurting your personal status with yourself or what have you.
I know at a young age for me, I hated being wrong. Anyone telling me that I was wrong. And so I think maybe how it went is I had this learned behavior of protecting whatever it is that I thought I believed to be right, because I didn't want anyone to think I was wrong. And there's a real, I think it must be a social dynamic there where that feeling that I get about being wrong or someone thinking I'm wrong or possibly ever admitting that I was wrong, that wasn't even an option, I don't think. And that grew into adulthood somewhat. And then at some point I realized it's doing me no good. I learn better by just saying, like someone in a conversation, someone mentions something that I don't understand. There must have been a time in my life where I just kind of played along and acted like I knew it. Now it's like, what does that mean? Because I'm okay with them. There's a risk there when no matter what the topic is, sometimes it's topics that are pretty simple, maybe to a lot of people, to raise your hand and take that risk of saying, this is something all of you know about. I don't know what it means. Please enlighten me. And I think it's not as embarrassing as it initially comes off, because the people that I've learned to value in life are the people that look at me and really appreciate that I want to know more. So that's one side of it. It kind of plays into this a little bit. But I think we all must deal with that at different points in our life, being more or less comfortable with whether it's to one person or to a group of people, or possibly over like a platform like this to X number of people that listen this week, and how many Y number of people will listen in the lifetime of this audio. In the previous ones where I say something, then I'm putting myself out there that it might not be right, it might be embarrassing, and just to get better at being okay with the fact that I'm not perfect and that my ideas might change. I know I kind of went through a lot there, but I'm comfortable with all that now, where some time ago I wouldn't have put myself out here with some of my ideas that I've put out already in the first 15 episodes. So as you're reading that article and recognizing some of these things that came to your mind, is there something about your life especially that you thought about, maybe how you might have looked at this before to how you look at it now?
A specific thing, the thing is when you're faced with a question for me, and this is something I kind of look back on after the fact, I tend to formulate an answer almost immediately. Given a certain problem set or given a certain question, I come up with what I think is a reasonable answer or a reasonable final answer. And then I might, if it's a problem, I might have to find a number of steps of a solution to get to that final outcome. And whether it be, let's say you're writing a paper for some class or you're doing something, whatever it is, whatever the task at hand is. But I've often wondered when I look back on it, when I made that first decision, that very first snap decision of, well, what's the final outcome I'm looking for? How did I come across with that? Because it could have been something else. And was that initial call the right call? Because I've just crafted a whole path to get to that end result. And I've made all these steps, and they could be very direct. They could just be a mess jumping all over the frickin' board to try to make it make sense to get to the end outcome. But then when you get to the end, you kind of wonder, it's like, was this really the best choice or the best thing to throw out there as a possible solution? And yeah, I mean, I look back at some of the things that I determined later I was wrong about, but I think it's a hard thing for people to do, like you said, for people to admit they're wrong when they've already put themselves out there. It's extremely difficult, and there is something that we have, and you see it project itself a lot in modern society with the differences politically and otherwise, and the very open public forums we have with social media. And I was watching something, and it was, of all people, Dr. Phil made a point about a thing called confirmation bias, where you have an idea in your head of what your answer to a thing is, whether it be a political thing or what have you. And you can give all the conflicting data or all of your proof that they aren't right. And the more you throw at them, the more they fervently fight against the fact that they might be wrong, because they don't want to be wrong. And actually, they mentally then at that point actually do retract even deeper into their initial thought. Even if you're proving them more and more wrong, they put themselves back into a deeper box of thinking they're right. It's a situation called confirmation bias. And I think it's extremely common in modern society in so many ways.
I think that seems like a natural thing to have confirmation biases, but it's intellectual humility plays into the awareness that I might have it. That even though I feel like, yes, I'm getting all these contradictory reasons to not like believe what I believe, and I hear them and I just push them aside and I don't want them. And suddenly I hear one thing, 1 out of 10 things defends my point. I'm like, yeah, that's true. And just ignore everything else. I feel like that's what we naturally want to do for whatever evolutionary reasons.
Right.
But at least playing into the intellectual humility, I have grown to have the awareness that I'm very capable of doing that. And just having the awareness of that, at least occasionally I can catch myself and think, uh-oh, I'm doing that thing again. I
love that you've made a personal decision to try to adopt this as a mindset, because it's a very learning based mindset. One of the best teachers, if you want to talk about great teachers of the world, was Richard Feynman. He was a major quantum physics, quantum mechanic teacher, and you may have seen or read the book Five Easy Pieces, trying to explain quantum dynamics and all this stuff. And he tries to put it in such a way that normal humans understand it. But he was such a good teacher, he could actually do that. But he was also known as an incredible student. When he would sit somewhere in a group with someone that was giving some information about something he knew nothing about, he wanted to learn about something, he'd sit down, and they've actually created a learning technique called the Feynman technique based on what he would do. He would list on the top of his notebook page what he didn't know. He'd say he'd write down what he did know and what he didn't know. Mm-hmm. And he would persistently ask questions, and he would build these answers instead of, it's just being in a learning mindset and not just, I don't know all the answers. It's not about knowing the answers. It's about learning the answers. You don't automatically know the answers, but we project ourselves like that, like we do. But maybe it's even more effective if you find a path to learn all the answers and ultimately be cool with that and ask the questions. And it's not an easy thing to do, because if you already have an idea that you maybe put out there, it's hard to be wrong. Lots of people have been wrong in history, and lots of people have stuck by them. Major scientists have come up with crazy, crazy, wonderful ideas that everybody believed for dozens or hundreds of years and said, this person is brilliant. That must be the right idea. And it turned out they were completely wrong. And a lot of people fought the new idea. Mostly like in the world of astronomy and things like that, there were lots of ideas that were presented that were deemed as the correct answer that turned out not to be so.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, I think like referencing a research paper or something that why did you make that first decision and go down this path? And I can relate to that in college sometimes at St. Cloud State University, where I needed to complete an assignment. And usually I'd procrastinate to the point where I wouldn't start early enough to really give myself a lot of time to possibly change course once I pick something. But I do know that
the idea of a first draft or a second draft and someone proofing your work, that was all out the window. No. I did all mine like crash course, end of the day. There was no multiple drafts. It was pounded out and always get it done on time, amazingly, but there it was.
It's that system. It's a system that begins in elementary school here in the United States, and I'm not sure exactly how it compares in other parts of the world. But as that example, I have this assignment. I need to get it done by this time. I know what it kind of takes to turn in something that might get the adequate grade of whatever I'm trying to accomplish to pass. So instead of really doing my best possible work or possibly really doing this assignment to learn, which I think is truly the point, or should be the point of it, I would realize, okay, I got to get this done. I got to turn it in. I want to get an A or B or whatever I'm trying to accomplish here. And I know what it takes based on my history in schooling with this teacher or professor to roughly get that. I would get down to a point where I think, oh, I don't really like this. This isn't really what I want. But it's like, I don't have time to actually do it as well as I want to, because going back and starting over would take too much time right now. I'll just go forward with what I'm doing. I'll stick to this, even though it's not the best. And I think that kind of relates to the mindset of once you put in time into an idea to possibly like be willing to undo that and reconsider everything. It seems too exhausting. It's better just to put the blinders on, go forward, and think that this is the best path to whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish. But that's what the intellectual humility is being willing to recognize wherever we are on our journey to whatever we're trying to accomplish, to think, yeah, maybe this isn't the best thing. And as much time as it's going to take and as awful as it's kind of going to feel, and to possibly tell people about it, how gross that is, I need to do this because there is a truth, or if there are truths, there is a truth that might exist. And the awareness that I might not be on the path to the best truth is something I can't allow for anymore. But I feel like I used to allow for it. And I think far too many people, as I cringe that I say this, still allow for that. And that needs to change. Otherwise, we're always going to be fighting with each other and not really making the progress we can make as humanity.
Oh, absolutely. Having some, one of the things that the paper talks about is, or the article in Vox, is giving a group of scientists like a forum or a way to effectively be able to say that they're wrong about certain things. It kind of goes into some detail about it. And how to really get that out of people, because you have to achieve a certain level of comfort with that idea that you have to get over yourself a little bit and realize that there might be, a different determination, and that actually might be a huge benefit to you. One of the things that I mentioned to you earlier when we were conversing about this back and forth a little bit was take a great mind like somebody like Carl Sagan. He had a lot of ideas about what something could be when they were building satellites to head their way to Jupiter or past Saturn and on and on and on, and what they might find. He had lots of great ideas. A lot of them didn't turn out to be right at all. But he very much accepted the fact that they were going to find something when they got there. And that something might be totally different than what he said it was probably going to be. But he was like the most okay with that. And just like enriched by it. Like, wow, I didn't think that that's what it was going to be. I even told people it was going to be something else. But isn't it amazing that it's this way? I guess there's more reward in something like that than some of the things we commonly come across in life, that if we are wrong, we seemingly have repercussions or some reason that makes us feel bad for being wrong or makes us look bad for being wrong or something like that. But realizing ultimately the outcome of the correctness could make everything a better thing. Our own thing, the whatever we're working on thing. And that's where this level of intellectual humility becomes an extreme positive thing that is worth striving for.
The awareness that I'm not perfect, and I don't need to think that I need to be anywhere near perfect. It's okay. As humans, we're extremely flawed, and all these reasons, the more scientists study the brain and understand why we do things, that we're gonna have misconceptions on so much, and just being okay with that is a good start, and not trying to always present ourselves as perfect. And for me, Josh would say that this is going to be therapeutic for me. Just having this podcast and talking to people, no matter who listens necessarily or how big it gets, just me doing this, having these conversations with different people and talk about different things is going to be therapeutic. And it certainly has been. And I'd hope that it continues to be. And if while I'm doing this, getting my therapy through this podcast, if people can find it valuable and interesting and entertaining anyway, I guess that's kind of the goal, that if I can get this much needed therapy for myself and my struggles in my own brain to try to exist in this reality that is so confusing in so many ways and help people do the same, that would be amazing. And I had all these other thoughts that have already come to my mind.
I came across an extremely similar situation because when I was quite sick, I was encouraged to put some of my thoughts about what I was going through into a Caring Bridge page.
Yeah.
A simple thing like that. And I'm like, I kind of put it off for a while. And then I thought, well, what am I going to put on this? I went to the doctor. I did this, or this is my crappy day I had, or this is my awesome day I had, or whatever. And immediately after doing the very first entry, it was just exactly that. It was therapeutic for me. And I started to have some fun with it, and it started to produce some over and over and stuff like that. And all of a sudden I realized how many people were reading this. And also I was getting all this encouragement from people about wow, you're a really fun, engaging writer. I wouldn't normally think of any topic like this to be interesting or fun, much less funny, but I find myself constantly laughing when I read your stuff. And I never considered myself to be a writer at all. I almost avoid writing if or things like that. But it was just one of those things that became therapeutic, and then all of a sudden I discovered was helping some people, and people were getting some value from it. It was, and still is, an incredibly amazing and cool thing to me. I love it. It's exactly that. It's therapeutic, and then it goes exponential from there. I never expected it.
I think it's a purpose of life. I don't know if the purpose of life. I'm not sure if there is a main purpose of life, but through our individual struggles, to be able to recognize first the reality that we're going to struggle sometimes, and then to be able to express it, communicate it in some way so that maybe other people struggle less with a very similar thing. What could be greater than that, to learn from what we didn't quite understand and had to go through, and to make someone else's life even just slightly marginally better, or perhaps in some cases amazingly better, because we figured something out that they don't need to spend all the time on, and to share that. So I can do it here. You might have done some of that in your Caring Bridge, and there's all these other platforms in 2019 to communicate with the largest audience possible, that we all could do this.
Yeah, and I had to go through a tremendous amount of learning when I was going through my transplant process, and I know a lot about it. The doctors say a lot, and you can research a lot of things outside of what the doctors tell you. And in so many ways, I'm a pseudo expert on the subject. And that has now deemed itself as an important thing, or a possible thing that I can use to help other people. And I've already done so. Some people that have come across some of their own medical problems and situations that have just came up, they're scared. They're in the beginning stages. And I can help them a lot by giving them my insight of what they're in for. And when they start hearing things from doctors, they can talk to me and I actually know what they're talking about. They talk to their friends. Their friends don't know what a this is or what a that is, or, what you can't use those terms around somebody that doesn't understand them. And it's been a great thing for me to be able to just turn around and use this knowledge that I've gained to help a couple other humans. And it's only been a few, but I wish it could be a lot more.
Well, right now, while we have a captive audience, if someone's dealing with maybe some alcohol problems...
Do we truly have a captive audience? Well, the meaning of life is actually tacos.
I did not know that.
Just checking.
So if someone's dealing with whatever alcohol-related issues that you've gone through and have, at least in many ways, graduated away from, and I'm sure it'll still be a battle your whole life, but you've done well in that regard, or something related to transplant, if someone listening is going to want to reach out to you, what's going to be the best way for that?
In the modern world, I don't hide from technology at all. I realize that I definitely have a footprint in the digital world. So I'm wide open. A person can email me, a person can call my cell phone, a person can text me, whatever they're most comfortable with. Some people have reached out with just, a Facebook message, like, I think I have something to talk to you about, or something, and it opens up a dialogue. And I'm more than willing to, honestly, not just take time out of, I'm willing to drop stuff that I'm doing in my life in order to be able to give you my full attention and give it my best to do anything I can to help you or answer your questions or do anything. I'd be more than willing to do that on whatever scale.
Okay, so then I will link to your Facebook and email probably in the show notes.
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
Someone can find that and reach
Absolutely.
out to you on those topics. And with the intellectual humility, we'll kind of stop it there for now. But this is going to be a repeating theme on my podcast. I want to work with people to understand where they're at in that.
I think it's a topic that does need a lot of further discussion, because you're going to find that if you dig a little deeper into your life or into your thoughts, you'll come up with some people that have good examples of times when they've had these moments happen to them where being intellectually humilitous.
Yeah, I said intellectually humble. I'm not sure if that's the right way.
Something like that would have been an advantage in this situation, but I think you'll find that a lot of people didn't take that path and they stuck their course and hoped the idea would go away, that nobody noticed they were wrong or something. But it's an interesting topic. And I'd encourage others to think about it a little bit on their own and see if this is something that they can make their world a better place.
Gene, if you could, as something I do in every episode of the podcast, is I ask my guests to think about something that they were wrong about, something that at this point in their life, they can look back and say, yep, I was wrong about this or that. My thinking's changed. I'm doing something different. Gene, what were you wrong about?
Wow. I've spent a lot of time recently kind of rediscovering a lot of the things that I have either done wrong or just mostly done wrong, that I feel reasonably bad about whatever I did. And it might only be affecting me personally, but I just kind of felt like I just didn't do something right at that moment. And it may not have hurt someone directly, but it's just, I have a clarity of mind right now that just causes me to think about these things. And it's, I really wish I had a great example for you right off the bat of sometime where I was really wrong. And I don't really know that I found a place that I even corrected myself properly at that moment. I just kind of hung on to my wrongness more so than anything. And therein lies your idea, and the idea of that article about intellectual humility, about something that I would personally like to look towards changing in my life, as far as maybe not reacting to my wrongness in that way. I know that's not a great example because it isn't an example.
It is an example of just the thought process that goes into looking back at our lives and thinking what we could have done differently and now maybe would do differently. If you're able to, maybe even related to what we talked about earlier in the episode, involving something to do with your health or something like that, I don't know if there is something there for you that you definitely would do differently right now with certainty based on the things that you've learned.
Yeah, there's because I made some decisions that I'd personally almost written myself off to the point where my decision was to continue to follow a path that would ultimately lead to me not being here anymore at all for my friends, my family, and otherwise. And I honestly convinced myself that that was what I was going to do. And I do wish that I would have maybe reconsidered that a little earlier. I'm in a good place now, but only after a very long path of medical treatment and other things like that probably could have been avoided if I would have maybe listened to what I was saying to myself a long time ago. And I couldn't convince myself that I was right. And I convinced myself that a different lifestyle was better, or the way I was going to go. And some of that is you're led by some powerful things that are making some decisions for you. That's part of a life of addiction or anything like that. Some things are ultimately out of your control, even if you think you're in control of them.
And I very much subscribe to that, as on previous episodes I've talked about free will or the illusion of free will. I think it's an illusion of free will, but it comes down to these competing thoughts in your mind. And if at a few years ago, the preeminent thought was to maybe continue whatever destructive behavior that you were doing, that was stronger at that time. But now, through other things you've been through and things that you've learned, just the awareness of how destructive it was allows these other thoughts, at least currently, like you said, I mean, as we talked about earlier in the episode, that you, for basically the last 20 years, prior to 2 years ago, the last 20 years, you would have 6 to 20 drinks per day. Like, that's how dependent you were on alcohol.
That's exactly how I described it to my doctor when she asked.
And now, 2+ years without drinking, there's been a lot of things that have influenced this, but I'm sure you can say that you were wrong about drinking that much your whole life.
Oh, I very much enjoyed it. That's for sure. My body had some other ideas down the road for that, obviously. I came across just a very kind of sudden epiphany where I just changed my mindset about a lot of factors that were involved in this. And I was extremely guarded about what was happening to me. My wife didn't know how bad things were. My friends didn't know. I was incredibly good at not showing my sickness or illness. You know, most people didn't really outwardly see that I was sick. Some people noticed, but they didn't say anything necessarily. But for the most part, it was when I really just decided I needed to just, for myself, that was the thing. I needed to accept it. I needed to be committed that my new path was going to be completely open. I was going to be open to all my friends. Any question they might have, I would answer, maybe more bluntly than they even wanted to hear. You know, I'd go out with friends of mine when I was getting very sick, and we'd talk about a lot of things, about things we'd done and other things like that. And a lot of times I'd close our conversation after going to lunch or whatever we did with, you know, did we cover everything? You know, a simple statement, but they'd go, yeah, I think we covered everything, just thinking it was just a random thought. And then I'd look them dead in the eye and say, but, you know, because just so you're really aware of this might be the last time we speak. You know, a lot of people that, obviously, if you die in an accident like Josh did, you don't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
But I literally had the opportunity to look at people and say, I might never talk to you again. Are we good? Because I don't want you to be regretting anything that we didn't talk about or didn't do or something like that. I don't want to be that person. Are we okay? Have you said everything you want to say to me? So it was pretty, yeah. And I had to commit, and committing to not drinking was a thing I just had to do, and I made it happen. It wasn't like it was unchallenging, but I committed to it.
That's powerful, Gene. And I think I've learned that in recent years to be more open and honest about just the things that I feel like I'm thinking about, struggling with, that I maybe would have not wanted to tell people before. But it sounds like as you went through this process of nearly dying and thankfully getting a liver transplant, hopefully living for a long time now, would you say that you're now going to be much more open and honest about everything moving forward than you ever were?
Oh, I would definitely say that. One of the things that, one of the main things that gave me the level of energy or power to make it through the days that I wasn't even really supposed to make it through. There were plenty of times when the lights should have gone out or were close to going out, a number of emergency room visits and things of the sort. And there were just plenty of those moments. And the things that brought me through them were the things that my friends opened up to me about and just expressed, maybe something you wouldn't express on a given day, telling somebody really what you mean to them, what they've done in your life, how your life is better or different because they were in it. And it was a powerful thing to me. It really kept me going, really kept me wanting to be there the next day and days after that for them or for myself.
The urgency, the deadline of it all brought these things to light.
Literally,
they were there.
Literally the deadline.
They were underlying. People would think these things, but finally this urgency of you not maybe being there again brought this out.
Because again, we covered everything. One of those things where it's like, I'm giving you the opportunity to not have to be like, if I only would have said this to them. What was the last thing I said to them? What was whatever? I wish I would have expressed this. I wish I would have said that. It's important to tell these people when they are around you. Don't just treat it like it's every other day. Treat it like it's the last day, literally. I mean, because you don't know. Something could happen like happened to Josh. I'd sent him just a random everyday text message like hours before his accident.
He texted me 15 minutes before the accident was reported. I don't know where he was at that time, if he was just leaving his previous appointment. I don't know. I'll never know. There's something he kind of wanted to talk to me soon. There's something he really wanted to talk about.
Right.
And I don't get to know that now, but I can hopefully learn from that and do better for myself and pass on some sort of helpful message to others.
Right. That's one of the things is I just realized after the fact that there was just so much left that we had to do. Not had to do, but so many things that I would have liked to do and tell him about, or that we could have done together, that occurrence isn't going to happen. And that makes you realize what I'd already realized from what I'd gone through myself with my own personal health issues, is that's important to kind of, figure these things out between these interpersonal situations that we have. They're extremely important things. There are very few things that are that important. There's almost nothing than our bonds with other people. That's one thing I would definitely say I gathered from this.
Well, we got it out of you, Gene. It was the being wrong segment, and I think that's as good of a message as I've heard from anybody in this, that being able to share these things that matter the most with the people that mean the most, and how urgent that might be is I think a lesson that all of us can learn. So
yeah, because that was a point where I was wrong, because I was so guarded about all of these ideas and what was wrong with me that I didn't want to tell anybody. And I didn't realize that I wasn't going to get through this by myself.
Thank you, Gene.
Hey, thank you. This has really been super interesting to me.
Thanks for listening to People I Know Show. If you'd like to contact Gene Leppala regarding struggles with alcoholism, organ transplants, or anything else from our conversation that inspires you to want to reach out to him, you'll find links to his email address and Facebook account in the show notes from today's episode. Links are also in the show notes for the People I Know Show Facebook and Instagram accounts. Please take a few moments to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And if you like People I Know Show, please encourage someone new to listen or share your favorite episode on social media. And feel free to email your feedback directly to me, Curt Carstensen, by using the email address peopleiknowshow@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.